We have plenty of games to discuss today with 9 games in total. A player pool like that should have plenty of options, so let's go ahead and get into it. Core plays Tyrese Halliburton, PG. Eind, $9,000 DraftKings, $9,400 FanDuel. Halliburton has had some rough games recently, but it's lowered his price to a point we can't fade.
This guy was above $10,000 earlier in the year, averaging over 50 DraftKings points per game. A minutes restriction killed his production around the All-Star break, but that's been lifted recently.
That means an upside game is right around the corner, and it's much more likely against a 22nd ranked Dallas defense. DeJounte Murray, PG, SG. ATL, $9,400 DraftKings, $9,000 FanDuel. We said Murray will remain in this section until he's $10,000 because he will play at that level with Trae Young out.
The versatile guard is averaging over 45 DraftKings points per game without Young over the last 2 years, flirting with triple-double averages. A matchup with NY looks scary on the surface, but that's a Knicks team that's missing 4 of its starters. The last time Murray finished a game in Madison Square Garden, he had 68 DK points in one of the best games of his career. Jimmy Butler, SF, PF. MIA. $8,100 DraftKings, $8,900 FanDuel. Playoff Jimmy is starting to come out of his shell. The All-Star has scored at least 49 DraftKings points in 5 of his last 6 outings, posting a 53-point average in that span.
That's the stud we always see at the end of the season, and we don't want to avoid him against Detroit's defense. The Pistons rank 27th in points allowed and defensive efficiency, with Jimmy dropping 47 DK points against them in their most recent meeting.
Cash game considerations: Luka Doncic, PG, DAL, $12,200 DraftKings, $12,700 FanDuel. Doncic leads the NBA with 66 DraftKings points per game and has an average north of 70 DK points over the last 2 months. He's got at least 72 fantasy points in 5 of his last 6 outings and could flirt with 100 fantasy points here.
That might sound outlandish, but Indiana plays at the fastest pace in the NBA while ranked 26th in total defense. This is bold, but a 40-point triple-double is what I expect to see from Luka here.
Nikola Jokic, C. Den. $11,400 DraftKings. The Joker has been the most reliable option in fantasy over the last 5 years, establishing a 50-point floor. He's paired that pristine floor with a 60-point average, averaging 65 DK points per game across his last 6 fixtures.
That's why he will win his 3rd MVP in 4 years, and he's always had his way with the Suns. He's averaging nearly 70 fantasy points per game against them over the last 2 years. Paolo Banchero, SF, PF. ORL, $8,600 DraftKings, $8,600 FanDuel. Banchero is averaging over 40 DK points per game in this playmaking role, scoring at least 43 fantasy points in 5 of his last 7 outings.
The best part about this is the matchup with Charlotte, sitting 24th in points allowed and 29th in defensive efficiency. That's crystal clear because Banchero has at least 45 DK points in all 4 of their matchups since the start of last year.
GPP targets Fred VanVleet, PG, SG. Who, $7,300 DraftKings, $7,800 FanDuel. VanVleet is showing flashes of climbing out of his slump, scoring 52 DK points across 42 minutes in his most recent outing. That's an absurd line from a player in this price range, but we've seen FVV creep closer to $9,000 on both sites over recent years.
His hot stretch should continue against the Spurs, surrendering the most fantasy points to opposing guards. Van Vliet is averaging 45 fantasy points per game in their 2 matchups this year.
Isaiah Hartenstein, C. NYK, $5,900 DraftKings, $5,800 FanDuel. Hartenstein has seen his minutes limited since returning from an Achilles issue, but that's not likely to continue. He is the only true center on this roster and could play 30 to 40 minutes. Given how short-handed this team is, we saw Hartenstein average 40 DK points per game in the month before his injury.
Atlanta is an astounding matchup, too, ranked 29th in points allowed and defensive efficiency ratings. Bojan Bogdanovic, SF, PF, NYK, $6,000 DraftKings, $5,900 FanDuel. Bogdanovic has been stuck on the bench in his first 2 weeks with the Knicks, but this sharpshooter could play 40 minutes as a starter here.
We've seen Bogdanovic play at a $7,000 level with this type of role in the past, and if that's the case, we'd have to use him against the second worst defense in the NBA. We saw Bogey drop 32 DK points across 39 minutes in his last matchup with Atlanta, and he was closer to $7,000 at that point in the year. Value plays Josh Hart, SG, SF, NYK, $7,900 DraftKings, $8,100 FanDuel. Hart regularly plays 40 to 45 minutes a night for this short-handed team, averaging 35 DK points per game over the last month.
We also saw him score at least 49 DK points in 3 of his last 4 fixtures, stuffing the stat sheet in each of those. We also don't mind that Atlanta allows the second most fantasy points to opposing wings, making Hart the safest play in this 45-minute role.
Clint Capella, C. ATL, $5,700 DraftKings, $6,100 FanDuel. Capella has been staring at a minutes restriction over the last week, but he's creeping closer to a full workload. The Hawks need him to get back to 30 minutes because Okongwu is out for the next 2 weeks.
When CC plays at least 30 minutes, he averages close to 40 fantasy points per game. We're not scared of the Knicks either because they're missing both of their starting front court players.
Dennis Schroeder, PG, VKN, $6,000 DraftKings, $6,400 FanDuel. Here we are with another player stepping up for an injured team. Brooklyn will likely be without Simmons and Thomas, which has moved Schroeder into the starting lineup.
He's scored 33 and 45 DK points in the 2 games in this newfound role, which is no surprise since Schroeder scored over 30 DK points per game as the starting point guard for Toronto earlier in the year. The Sixers used to be a scary matchup, but they've been in the bottom 10 since Joel Embiid got injured.
Advantageous pricing. Derek White, PG, SG, Boss, $6,600 DraftKings, $7,800 FanDuel. Drew Holiday, PG, SG, Boss, $6,100 DraftKings, $7,100 FanDuel. Paul Reed, PF, C, Phi, $5,100 DraftKings, $6,100 FanDuel. Victor Wembanyama, PF, C, SAS, $10,700 DraftKings, $12,000 FanDuel. Amen Thompson, SG, SF, Det, $5,200 DraftKings, $7,300 FanDuel. Zach Collins, PF, C, SAS, $4,500 DraftKings, $6,500 FanDuel. Daniel Gafford, C, Dahl, $4,300 DraftKings, $5,500 FanDuel.